afternoon, energy revolutionaries. Welcome to Energy News Biz. I'm your host, Arnes Biogradlia, here to crack open the future like fusion reactor at a full tilt. Today's guest doesn't just think outside the box, he's dismantling the box entirely. Put your hands together for the man who maps energy futures like a cartographer of chaos, Dr. Simon Michaux. Simon, welcome.
Hello, Arnes. Nice to see you again. Cartographer of chaos. It's a new one. I like it.
it goes with what you're doing these days. Simon is a geologist, energy strategist, and the architect of ideas that make conventional sustainability models look like dial-up in 5G world. He spent decades dissecting resource bottlenecks from mining tailings to nuclear red tapes. And his latest work, Promethean Nexus and Vulcan Catalyst, is a blueprint for industrial rebirth. Before Simon takes the stage, here's your mission. DM your toughest questions on regulation, sandboxes, SMR economics, whatever else you have. I'll fire them at Simon post-presentation. Simon, the mic is yours.
Rock and roll. Okay, so are we good? Is it in presentation mode?
Yes, it works.
All right, so let me know. I can't see you, Arne, so if I'm going off trail or anything like that, please interrupt. All right.
Everything works.
So this is actually my old consulting business card that I used a decade ago, and I've used the images again here. Anyway, so Energy Unchained. And why I believe the next industrial era won't look like anything we've seen so far. All right. The summary of where we're going to go over the next little while. Fossil fuels will leave us soon, probably before we're ready. I have new data to show for gas and coal. I also have a simulation to show you that light conventional nuclear won't expand fast enough to be useful. The planned green transition faces serious logistical bottlenecks in its current form. I have some new information to show you on highly variable electricity generation. The counterplan, the purple transition, a quick summary on that, but I have a small sequence to show not one, but two examples of thorium-fueled small modular reactors. Both have an example in functioning in China. One of them is being built in Europe. So if we were to take all this information and say, look, what will we do with it? And if we were to add a whole lot of new ideas, what will we do? And so I've come up with a plan where there's two aspects of this plan. Promethean Nexus is the development of the long-range plan. Vulcan Catalyst is the start, which will lay the foundation. It's an industrial project that will sell cheap electricity and cheap diesel fuel. It will secure the land, fund all industrial assets, and construct the starting seed of the city. So let's get into it. Fossil fuels are toast. Oil, conventional crude oil, in addition to oil from the tight oil sector together, may have peaked in November 2018. We are right up against that peak, and maybe we're about to pass it. On the other hand, that is dependent on the production of the US tight oil sector, which is now facing more headwinds than before. So are we on a plateau or have we peaked? I don't know, but it is certainly looking like oil's not going to be able to expand greatly into the future, like our growth-based economics requires. Natural gas, so reserves and consumption, that's the 2020 numbers that I could find. We have a lot of natural gas if we've got the money to pay for them. However, I've got some new data to show you shortly. Coal, we've got lots and lots of coal, although we've actually mined out a lot of the good quality stuff, and what is left is tends to be the lower grade stuff. So here's the oil data. This was developed by John Peach. He used to work at the MIT Lincoln Laboratory. He's retired now, and this information is now going into a paper he's currently submitting. The chart on the left is discoveries of oil, where most of the oil was discovered decades ago, peaking in the 60s. Production, on the other hand, has been increasing, steadily increasing. Now we're at a point where for every barrel of oil that we are discovering, we're consuming 4 or 5. The chart on the right is the same information. So the The colors are reversed. Sorry about that. But the discoveries are red. The discoveries are red. Production is blue. Take one from the other, and we've got the green, and that is net inventory. So in 1985, we had the peak addition to oil in context of inventory. The production midpoint was 1996. So what that means is, since 1996, all oil that's ever been extracted has been produced since then. So that's oil. Here is oil production. It's up to January 2024. I've not been able to get more current data than that, but we're still on this undulating plateau. We've got a possible peak at November 2018. Whether that really is the peak or it exceeds, we are on a long-range plateau as far back as 2014. We haven't really moved off it. And our system is supposed to double and triple in size by the time we get to 2050. So this to me is quite telling. In 2016, HSBC did a study, and they found that 81% of existing oil reserves are being annually depleted at a rate between 5 and 15%. So while we're on this plateau, in the background, our reserves are depleting fast and we're not discovering new ones. The message here is we should seriously think about the after oil plan, the after fossil fuels plan, because there will come a point when oil leaves us, and if it takes 20 years to construct the infrastructure required to replace the oil and petroleum system, we really need to get on with it. This is gas. So again, John Peach's work. This, as I understand, is the first time this data has been presented in the world. John did this analysis in the last couple of weeks. The chart on the left is a discoveries. Again, most gas was discovered in the 60s and the 70s. Every year, we've been consuming more gas with each passing year. Now, the same chart's on the right. The red is discovery and blue is production, and the green is one from the other. So cumulative reserves peaked in 1995. And since then, for the last 30 years, we've been on the downward slope. So the midpoint here was 2003. So half of all natural gas ever extracted has been extracted in the last 20 years. This has been quite okay because we don't use that much gas. We only use some of it for electrical power generation. No, we use gas, for some electrical power generation and for some plastics production. So we're not. We've got the chart on the right that says we've got plenty of gas and we've got gas for some time because it's a relatively minor fuel compared to oil and coal, as it turns out. I presented recently to some bankers in London, in Westminster, and I presented my analysis that I'm about to show you now. And they said, look, we know all this. Especially since the Spain and Portugal incident, we know that solar and wind are not viable, and they are stepping out in terms of the investment opportunities associated with industrial investment into energy. And they said their plan is to go back to gas-fired gensets. And so, because they know and understand this technology quite well, and they're very happy with the outcome. This data is showing that at best is a stopgap, and they need to think about something else on the other side of that short, quick, smart. So this is coal. Again, John Peach. John, I owe you a beer, perhaps more than one. All right. So the red is discoveries, blue is production, and green is net reserves. So coal had a net addition to reserves in 1975 or around then. And since then, we've been on the downward slope. But as you can see, we are not even close to depleting the vast amount of reserves that we've got. So coal will be with us for some time. It's lower quality coal, and there's pollution issues with that coal, but there's lots of it. I've been reading a number of books. These 3 books in particular were very interesting for me about how the power grid comes together. So I've just spoken to you about fossil fuels. Now we're moving into, well, what's the nature of the power grid? And what about the green transition, like renewable energy? How will we go through that? The power grid, especially in the United States, is very fragile. it is very complex, and it has built over time in layer upon layer upon layer of complexity. It has almost no resilience at all, and it is an industrial technological marvel that it operates as reliably as it does. Most people don't understand the work that is done to keep that situation going. So, 3 quick case studies. 4th of September, Alamosa County, Colorado, in the United States. A very large cloud bank moved in, big storm. So that resulted in an 81% drop in electricity for the solar farm that served that whole region. 81%. And they had to source that power from somewhere else, and it was a power shortfall, and they didn't know what to do. 5th of January, Columbia, River George, USA. The wind stopped blowing and did not start again for 3 weeks. 19th of May, 2010. Again, Columbia River, George, USA. These are fairly large regions, by the way. This is not a single system. Like Columbia River Gorge has over 1,000 wind turbines in it at the time. It's more since then. Right, so a big storm front moved into the region. And in a single hour, a vast amount of wind pushed in, and 1,000 wind turbines went from relatively normal power generation to spinning really, really fast and generating a lot of power, a lot of chaotic power. The equivalent of 2 average-sized nuclear power plants worth of extra power was pushed into the grid and had to go somewhere. The power grid has to balance, where supply and demand has to balance to a level of a millionth of a second. Supply and demand need to balance each other always. So when you have these big changes, the people who run the grid have to move heaven and earth very, very quickly to keep everything going. Because if it moves out of a very narrow window of operation, the grid will shut down. So this was a massive, uncontrollable, unmanageable, and unstorable and undumpable electrical surplus. And so they just shut the grid down. The solution would have been to turn the wind turbines off. And this is one of the complexities. The company that owned the wind turbines made a lot of money by extra power generation. That was in their contract. A separate company managing the grid was trying to convince them to turn the wind turbines off so the grid can survive, or the grid wouldn't have to shut down. But because there were 2 different companies, and one was making money and one wasn't, by the time they actually got to an agreement, the grid just simply shut down and they had a black start. This is part of the complexity that they're dealing with. This is the Spain case study. A couple of weeks ago, months ago now, we had a power blackout in Spain and Portugal. This is what the Iberian Peninsula looks like at night normally. And on the 28th of April, 2025, 2 whole countries, 2 whole European Union countries had a blackout and had to do a black start. Here is that data. So what you're seeing here is the yellow line is demand, and everything else was production. So they had far more electricity than they actually needed. And the problem was solar. They had more solar, but the solar power that comes in is highly variable, not just in voltage and current, but frequency. The frequency of the power and the VAR frequencies were all very chaotic and outside specification. And not 1, but 2 trip commands came out, and the whole grid just had to shut down, and that set off a cascade, and the entire region shut down. So the idea that we could have a 3 times build out of solar and wind, and that'll negate the need for a storage buffer, was put to rest with this case study. You can have too much power of the wrong frequency, and because we are now subject to the weather, it's all very chaotic. Wind, it turns out, is very variable, highly variable, more so than solar. This was a case study I've shown a couple of times. So this is Sweden, Denmark, UK, France, and Germany, their wind power all put together. And what we're seeing is when one region has a peak, the others do too. But when there's a wind lull, that also extends over a wide area. So you can't use the power from, say, Germany to balance France or UK to balance Denmark, because everyone's got the same problem at the same time. And there's variations of up to 48%, which are massive swings. This was the 13-day power drop-off in Texas in 2021. In the same year, they had 2 power dropouts, one in winter, one in summer. This was winter. So a really, really severe cold storm came through, and a lot of equipment just froze, and there were power disruptions. So this graph also shows how variable wind is on a day-to-day basis, but you see that variation on a minute-to-minute basis. It really is quite variable. Power generation fell by over 50% at peak times, and the grid struggled to meet demand. So what they found was getting a black start going. It was much easier to get gas-fired power generation systems going than renewables. That was the outcome of that era. Every time this sort of thing happens, we all learn something. We all learn what we need to do. So the Department of Energy in the United States gave me this information after reading my 2021 report. And they actually talked to me about this. This is our largest power grid that serves 100 million people, and it has 6.3 megawatts of solar and 11.8 gigawatts and 11.8 gigawatts of installed capacity of wind. And what they found was over a 2-year period, there was a clear drop. In winter, solar power did indeed decrease by quite a lot. And in summer, wind decreased by quite a lot. So not only are the capacity factors low, but there were low points at the seasonally worst possible times. So the question was, could they offset each other? Well, I've got some data to show you. So we collect all this data across the couple of years, and the question was, if this was a standalone system and the solar network had 22% capacity, which is actually quite high compared to the rest of the world, but let's say they did, right, and that was their contract, they would still need a days in storage of 23 days. 23 days, and that power, and there'll be no respite for 212 days across winter. So, yeah, the conventional thinking says 5 to 7 hours. That doesn't get us through winter. Here is that same data, but now we're actually sort of the chart on the left looks at wind and solar, as in what power was actually produced. What was produced and when. And so what was the total power produced from these two grids over that time? And you're seeing quite a variation. What you're also seeing is wind is far more variable than solar. Solar is a bit more predictable. So the question is this: would it be possible for wind and solar to buffer each other? So when the sun doesn't shine, the wind is blowing somewhere. Will that help us? So I normalize the data to the chart on the right to, what was the power production, how many hours of production per megawatt of installed capacity. And what you're seeing here is wind, that chart, those columns would have to be close to a flat line if this was to work. And you're still seeing quite a bit of variation. You're also seeing wind is far more variable, even at the per megawatt of production scale, far more variable, and solar was far more predictable, even though we had a less shortfall. And there was up to a 29% variation across that when it should be a flat line. So can wind and solar buffer each other, making stationary storage buffer obsolete? I don't believe so, and that's what this graph is telling me. Also, some of the technology required to make that grid stable and reliable doesn't exist yet, but it could be developed. It could be developed, but as far as I know, it hasn't been done yet. This can't work without large amounts of redundancies at this stage. So, moving on. This is the work I did in Hawaii. If Hawaii was to phase out fossil fuels, what would that look like? So we took data from the NREL site that's actually collecting solar radiance data on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. We then got classifications across the year, what each of the different, we had 5 different types of solar power setups. So, okay, what were they? And so we had domestic housing, like a single-family rental, essentially domestic house, commercial rooftop, parking spaces. Then we had the arrays, fixed tilt ground mount and single-axis tracker ground mount. So what was their production in terms of kilowatt hours per installed kilowatt across each month for the state of Hawaii? And we came up with this data here in the simulation. So over a 12-month period, we did see a big peak and decline. Now, if this was a standalone system, and if this was a standalone system, then the average the dotted line would be the average is about what it would be produced, would be the contract. So anything above that line could be captured and stored. Anything below that line would have to be brought in from somewhere else. The shortfall below the dotted line was 2.46 terawatt hours, which was 28.8 days of power storage would be needed. So Hawaii, where the sun shines reasonably well, would need 28.8 days of power storage buffer. Again, this is to show that the idea that 5 to 7 hours is what conventional thinking believes is simply not enough. Right, so the green transition can't be resourced. Wind and solar are highly variable. We're dependent on the weather, which is a chaotic system that we can't predict. So a power storage buffer is needed in some form to get through the day-night cycle. Excuse me. To get through the day-night cycle, to get through the seasonal differences, winter versus summer, and to get through the wind lulls up to 3 weeks. The 3 times build out of wind and solar plus a 6-hour buffer won't work. To use wind and solar to buffer each other, well, some tech needs to be developed. Okay, that's not the end of the world. But in the renewable energy sector, a dunkel flotte, or dark doldrums, or dark wind lull, is a period of time in which little or no energy can be generated with wind or solar. Right, and in meteorological, this is known as an anticyclonic gloom, which means the industry got a term for that. The other problem we've got is mineral resources and reserves. So this was a study, a peer-reviewed study that's gone through. The red column is the amount of metals that we need to phase out fossil fuels and have the same level of activity as the year 2018. The column next to it is you've got grey, white, and black. The grey is reported mineral reserves. The white is resources on land, and the black is resources that we think are under the sea at the moment. Not even close, right? And so the shortfall is so great that this is not a question of going out and finding more minerals. We need to go back to the drawing board. Conventional nuclear. Now, when I was in undergraduate doing my original degree was physics and geology. And in physics, I was actually training to be a worker in a nuclear power plant. That was my big plan in the beginning. So, right. So I did a simulation. This is the 2021 report. So if we were to expand the nuclear power plant fleet from 2025 onwards, and we were to bring online an extra 25 average size Generation 3 plus power plants every year, including replacing the old plants that have to be phased out. And it took 5 years to build a plant, not the 20 or 30 it does. And then we will expand from current rates of electricity production, and we will get to a level of out to 75 years later, 2101, we get 68% of the way there to phase out all fossil fuels. So what this is saying, if nuclear was to be an acceptable system, it would have to step in and be viable to supply the vast majority of our energy in 5 to 10 years if we're to make this happen. So 75 years, that's not going to happen. We can't expand fast enough to be useful. I'm a supporter of nuclear, but it needs to evolve into something else. The planet can't produce enough biofuels. So this is also the 2021 report. If we were to actually replace gasoline consumption and diesel consumption for the year of 2018, and if we were to grow diesel fuel and corn fuel at the same time, the amount of land that we would need is on the left. So that amount of land far exceeds any crop arable land that we have, and it's comparable to the amount of forest we have on the planet. The chart on the right is the amount of water we would need, fresh water, compared to the existing annual freshwater withdrawal. So the planet cannot produce enough biomass to produce enough biofuels for a straight substitution. Right. So what are we really trying to do here? We want electricity generation. We want transport. We want manufacture. So we want reliable and consistently stable power generation in all weathers in all geographical regions, preferably in concentrated form, preferably with a low materials footprint, a long working life, and designed to be recycled. Minimal waste plume with a very low environmental impact. So I propose the purple transition, the resource balanced economy, which is at the heart of it is an evolved and reinvented resource management system. At the heart of it is thorium-fueled generation for small modular reactors. There are now two technologies on the books for this. One is molten salt reactor. The other is a pebble bed reactor. More on that later. Electric vehicles, but powered by different chemistries, non-lithium chemistry. Anything short range less than 100 kilometers, that's what we need. Combustion of iron power as the thermal fuel, which will be in a replacement for coal. Pyrolysis of human sewage. So we take human sewage and we heat it without oxygen. And then that becomes we can make syngas. And that syngas can be used as domestic cooking oil, or we can recycle the combusted iron powder. And it's a recyclable fuel. Ammonia-fueled internal combustion engine technology for our long-range transport. There are a couple of other things as well. Right, so energy systems. We want a non-fossil fuel paradigm that allows decentralization, simplification, and contraction in size of the industrial sector. So this is the molten salt burner. This is the molten salt burner. So what it is the thorium takes the form of a salt, thorium and fluoride together. It's not radioactive at the beginning, and its hazard sheet says don't get it wet so it doesn't dissolve. It's put into the reactor and they have a neutron source to bombard it, and some of the thorium is transmuted into uranium-233. The uranium-233 is hot, it melts the salt, it turns into a liquid, and then it moves around the circuit, exchanging heat. That heat is then taken and then used to turn water into steam, which turns a generator, which generates electrical energy. So this thing's already liquid. The fuel can be exchanged and cleaned while it's still operating. It doesn't need to shut down. If it gets too hot, you've got a freeze plug and the fuel just drains out of the reactor and can be into separate dump tanks, can be dealt with elsewhere. Also through a process called Doppling, the Doppler cascade. If it gets too hot, the neutron economy will cascade over the top of itself and shut down. So there's not one, but two things to stop it from melting down. So this is inherently safe, and it's not going to produce something like a Chernobyl or Fukushima accident. In 1972, they had a report where molten salt breeder reactors came in, and this report showed it worked. And they were asking for funding to actually extend it. This is the picture of their system that they're working. It was 7.4 megawatts. It had 6,000 hours of uninterrupted power generation without a problem. China. is actually already commercially using this power already. So the light water reactor that, the liquid fuel thorium reactor of 2 megawatt size is in the Gobi Desert and has been commercially selling power since 2022. So this is not a theory. The technology is out there running and it's in the commercial world already. There are multiple systems in China. I'm going to present you with 2 of them. I went to Europe, Copenhagen. Copenhagen Atomics is producing a factory, or making a factory that will produce these, and they'll be producing by 2028, this stage, if all goes well. Their system is 100 megawatts of thermal heat or 40 megawatts of electricity. It's a modular system where they can stitch as many of these things together to construct an arranger of power capacities. Each reactor is the size of a 40-foot shipping container. Electricity will be sold at a projected 2 cents a kilowatt hour. 1 gram of thorium or uranium produces 24 megawatt hours of thermal energy. So a plant producing, say, 1 gigawatt hour of capacity will consume 800 kilograms of thorium-232 in metal salt form each year. So I actually went out there, and that's a picture of me standing in front of one of their test rigs. In their factory, they had 20 or 30 of these, each testing a different part of the system. They're very well advanced. They have a complexity of about, like, say, a three bedroom kit home, and they're planning to make 1 of these a day out of this factory. And from what I saw, that's not going to be a problem. Anyway, so their model is not to sell you the reactor. They will finance, build, and own and operate them on behalf of the customer, and they will sell the electricity to the customer. And that's their model. So this is what they look like. That's the full-size system. It's the size of a shipping container and arrives on a truck. So when it's installed, they'll mount 50 years of fuel in it, and they have a 5-year maintenance cycle where they come in and they strip out corroded parts and maybe even clean a bit of the fuel. And then when the reactor is done, they take it away and replace it with another one. That system there produces 40 megawatts of electricity. So I did a mass balance of reactor fuel consumed. Uranium on the right, uranium on the left, thorium on the right. I had to put them on a log graph so you could actually see them on the chart. There is a substantial reduction in the amount of fuel being consumed. And the reason for that is what actually drives the uranium reaction is an isotope of U-235, which naturally is about 0.7% of natural uranium. The enrichment process takes it to about 4%. So each of your fuel rods has pellets in it with only 4% of useful fuel. So when that's depleted, they've got to take it out and put it in storage. The vast majority of the stuff goes in is not useful. For thorium, every single atom of thorium is used. It's transmuted to U-233 and it goes through the process. So reactor fuel on the left, spent nuclear fuel on the right. So we've got an order of magnitude difference in the amount of spent waste. So this is a much simpler system. The reason this happens is, right, so on the left we've got your pellet of uranium oxide. Most of it, 96% of it, is uranium-238. It's not useful. It's not useful in actually keeping the neutron reaction going. 4% is uranium-235. There's also the problem of shielding. The stuff on the outside will shield the stuff on the inside. So it's not a very efficient use of fuel. The liquid fuel system on the right, though, with U-233, is an entirely different set of circumstances. Everything in that liquid moves around. There is no shielding. Every part of the fuel eventually comes into contact with every other part of the fuel. And we're consuming 96.9% of that fertile fuel going in. This also represents an opportunity. Spent nuclear fuel is mostly uranium-238, with a few other isotopes of uranium and plutonium in there. So if we take uranium-238, which is down here, and we bombard it with neutrons, which is what happens in a reactor, it eventually, over time, becomes U-233, and that is fuel for the molten salt reactor. So if we're in the situation here where fuel's moving around and there is no shielding, and it doesn't matter if fuel stays in there a bit longer than normal, it doesn't actually stop anything. So what this means is we can actually, over time, put small quantities of spent nuclear fuel into a molten salt reactor and turn it into useful fuel. This is a solution for the nuclear Achilles heel of what to do with the spent nuclear fuel. This is such an opportunity. So now I'm going to show you the second thorium system. This is a thorium high temperature reactor, gas cooled. So a high temperature gas cooled reactor. This is a pebble bed reactor. This is actually of a different profile to the MSR, and they both have their pros and cons. So there's the Nature paper. Right. So what this is you've got your fuel. So your fuel is like, say, 0.5 millimeter in size of uranium or thorium. It works for either. And we coat it with a series of it becomes what's called a triso fuel element. And so they coat it. So the final pebble is about 60 millimeters in diameter. This is important because solid fuel thorium, when they tried it in India, it worked, but the problem was the fuel particles got corroded on the surface, and they had to take the fuel pellets out, and dip them in acid while they were still very radioactive, and then put them back into the reactor. And while it was doable, it wasn't worth the hassle, because uranium was a better fuel when it actually came down to it. This solves that problem, though, where the surface doesn't corrode, and all the thorium can actually be consumed as fuel. So it's a very simple system. It's a tall cylinder. You have a pebble bed with the pebbles. Pebbles are dropped in the top, and over time they're used, and out of the bottom they'll take them out every now and then and examine each pebble as we go along to see if it's actually been used or not. If it still has useful thorium uranium in it, it's put back in. If it's not, it's sent off for recycling. What's interesting, and what's been proposed, one of my contacts, Raymond Parla-Singh, a very knowledgeable chap, he was actually making the point that we need lots of graphite for this, and this could be a useful application for the coal industry. That's an interesting innovation I hadn't considered. Anyway, so and the group that are developing this is Southern Infrastructure. Here is an example, a photograph, sorry, of the system being installed in China. So this is actually up and running now. So there's the link if you wish to check that. What interests me is as follows. The modular size, this is like a 20 megawatt system. And so it's the MSR unit was 40 megawatts. This is 20. So you could have several of these small systems, and so you have like built-in redundancy. It's great. What's really cool though is the outlet temperature is 950 degrees Celsius, whereas the MSR was only 560. So that 900 degrees turns out to be a threshold. 900 degrees turns out to be a threshold. All sorts of things are possible. The sulfur iodine hydrogen production requires 900 degrees, and it was previously rejected because supplying that kind of heat was a problem. The other thing that interests me here is these are small enough to be deployed in a shipping container, and they've got a 24-month factory build. This system is safer again than the MSR. Now, the MSR, you've got a hot liquid that's high pressure moving around the system. If you have a crack in a pipe, then you've got like hot liquid spraying out of that crack. There's a lot of engineering done to prevent that from happening, but this is just a pebble bed. There's nothing to leak. There's nothing to melt down. It's inherently safe. So the system's larger. So for a capex of the capex for a 20 megawatt systems with all the support infrastructure is around 440 million. And they could sell power at 1 cent a kilowatt hour. Now, South America, where I'm actually looking, industrial power at mates rates on a good day is 13 cents a kilowatt hour. So not only are we phasing out fossil fuels, not only are we doing it in a decentralized fashion, but we are undercutting the market. Right, so that is the end of the thorium run. So now we're moving into the solution space. To fix all this, we need two things to happen. This is actually the conclusions of my professional career thus far. We need an innovation hub that has a mandate to look at unorthodox ideas. We need demonstration of some of those ideas, at least to a pilot scale. When you go and talk to an investment group and you give them an idea, so that's great. Now show me show me an example of this working. And that's where almost everything falls down. It is so hard to get past that point. I would like to create an innovation hub that demonstrates these ideas and then publishes the results. This will trigger a wave of investment. This will add to the flow of a vast amount of money and capital that's looking for a place to land. It will also provide a safe haven for innovators to invent, where the point where they actually get some money out of this. To make all this happen, we need a natural energy source. We need electricity, we need heat, both of which has to come from that natural energy source. We need raw materials. Where do we get them from? But then we need industrial capability to actually access all that stuff. And this is the website that my wife and I have put together, PrometheanNexus.com or Promethean-Nexus.com. For those who are interested, go to the website, have a look. Sign up to the newsletter if you wish to remain informed. So from this point on, I'm now going to describe this project. It's based on three pillars. There are three basic aspects there's Promethean Nexus. This is the plan. We're making an unconventional city that will be a gateway between now and the next way of doing things. Then there's Vulcan Catalyst. This is the foundation that secures the land. This is an industrial project that's based around the idea of selling cheap electricity and cheap diesel fuel. The revenue raised from that will be a foundation for everything else. The third pillar is the Innovation Hub, which I call the Chrysopeia Institute. This has a mandate to look at unorthodox ideas and develop useful solutions into a formal form where they can be used. And this is Promethean Nexus. Arnis, can you hear me? Is everything still okay?
Everything runs smoothly.
Brilliant. Right, so this is Promethean Nexus. What we're trying to do, it's inspired by Jacques Fresco's ideas, and he founded the Venus Project, which is still running. At thevenusproject.com, I recommend people go and have a look at it. I read in his writings, I never met the man, but he was clearly a genius. So I'm paraphrasing. I listened to a number of his presentations of what the future could be developed. And so what is our paradigm behind it all? If we were to design a human settlement, let's call it a city, and we use the best science to have to offer, but also optimize the whole city to the well-being and quality of life for the people who lived in that city, what would that look like? And so when I was researching the energy grid, the history of it, it was very apparent that it evolved over time in layer upon layer upon layer, and it was a Frankenstein system that was terribly inefficient, but people were completely helpless in doing anything about it. But if they were to design an energy grid from scratch and build the whole thing whole cloth in a greenfield context, it would be very different. I think this is the case with all our technology, including how we design our cities. So this is a new paradigm how we might live. This is an evolution of the existing industrial society, powered by an unorthodox, mature energy source, operated to a new resources management paradigm, which is what I'm now proposing. A more responsible relationship with the planetary environment is what we're after. That has to change. Now, as we're bringing in new technology and it changes things, we can also look at how we live socially. And there's a lot of discussion of what would our social contract be if we had a debate about this and tried to work out the best way, how could we do that? There's a lot to be said for our current way of doing things at the moment. It does have a series of shortfalls. So we will construct a technology innovation hub in an unconventional city to the purpose of developing a new energy, raw materials, and manufacture paradigm operated by a more socially mature kind of society. The vision is this: a decentralized energy system that now operates to a different set of metrics. New relationship with the natural environment. We're reimagining and restructuring the transport network. Transport has to change. So more on that later. We're going to look at changing what money is used for. If we have time for that, we can discuss that as well. The start of the development of new social contract in there's a sequence of events that has to happen, but I'm interested in taking what we call game B and evolving it into something else. There'll be a new way of resource stewardship. So the resource balanced economy is an evolution of Jacques Fresco's resource-based economy. More on that later. The circular economy, which is what is studied in Europe, it's systems designed for partial resource sourcing. And the steady state economy, systems design boundary conditions. So this is the simplification. The human system will now shrink in size and shrink in complexity. Simplification of complexity of the existing industrial network into a smaller, self-sustaining system. So the plan is to run society on a smaller number of components, that they themselves are simplified systems that are easy to make, and we're going to manufacture them from resources that we source locally and regionally. Completely change the whole paradigm. So we want to develop a comprehensive plan for social reclamation in which human beings, technology, and nature will be able to coexist in a long-term, sustainable state of dynamic equilibrium. That's another Jacques Fresco quote. I would have liked to have met that man. And that brings us to Vulcan Catalyst. This is the other aspect of this project. This is an industrial project that will raise revenue, and it will do that through the sale of cheap electricity, cheap diesel fuel, and the production of graphene products. We want a self-sufficient industrial innovation hub. We're going to produce electricity using thorium-fueled MSRs, but also thorium small modular reactors and possibly a uranium-fueled system as well in what I call reactor park. More on that later. As we are generating that electricity, we are taking water from the sea. Now, that's important because every region that we look at now has possible drinking water shortages, or at least the area I'm looking at in particular. If we can work out a way of having all our water needs taken from the sea, we're not in competition with the locals for their own drinking water at a time when there's not quite enough to go around. I'm talking about the coast of South America. So I'm going to talk about this later, but we take water from the sea, we desalinate it using heat from the reactors, put it through the turbines, and then we capture that steam, and that's our drinking water. The human sewage from the settlement that's there, we will take that human sewage and heat it without oxygen in a system called pyrolysis, which is heating without oxygen. That breaks down into a couple of products. One of those products is called syngas. Now, syngas could be used as domestic cooking gas, which is a big energy consumer on the electric power grid when all our stoves are electric. We will produce diesel fuel through the recycling of rubber tires. More on that later. Again, through pyrolysis. We take rubber tires, shred them, heat them up without oxygen, and they break down into a liquid. So you have carbon black coming off that, and that carbon black can be turned into graphene, and then the carbon black can be turned into carbon fiber and 3D printed carbon fiber products, which we could sell. The liquid that comes off that can be distilled further into a saleable diesel product. So the sale of diesel and the sale of electrical power that undercuts the market at the moment will fund this enterprise. The path of development is as follows. Approach a locally positioned company, like a mine site, that needs a large amount of energy to function. A mine site needs something like 50 megawatts of power supplied sustainably, and that they're having real troubles trying to do that with renewable power. Get that corporation to request the local government to create what's called a regulation sandbox. And in that sandbox, we will do a number of research actions. So this will be a partnership between the corporation, Vulcan Catalyst, and the local regional government. We want permission to construct and operate Generation 4 small modular reactors fueled by thorium and uranium. We also want permission to construct and trial innovative building materials like geopolymers. Once we get that regulation sandbox, we set up Reactor Park. This will also help us secure the land. This will be part of the deal. Once we get Reactor Park up and running, operate 3 to 5 small modular reactors of different technologies. Thorium and uranium, but I prefer thorium. Excuse me. Sell some of that electricity being generated and heat to the mine site. Use some of that electricity and heat to produce saleable products from primary and secondary sourced materials. This is actually using the principles of the circular economy. Can we valorize the waste streams around us? The answer is yes. One of them, the primary one, is to recycle rubber tires using pyrolysis to make cheap diesel fuel. And this development will also fund a workers' village, which will be the starting seed of the city. The final action for this, as it evolves, we will fund the Innovation Hub, the Chrysopeia Institute. More on that later. So we will produce and sell cheap non-fossil fuel electricity and cheap diesel fuel. As time goes on, so we will start small and we will start with one or two operations. But as revenue comes in, parallel operations can start up in a revenue generation context. A new system can be brought online that will be able to generate revenue, and it will all balance. But each of these systems are optimized where the outputs of one are fed in as inputs to another. And this is actually what I call industrial permaculture. We end up with what I call a constellation of 30, maybe 30 pilot plants, industrial pilot plants, and they're all optimized together as one large system. And this is what I call industrial permaculture. More on that later. What are the implications of a small industrial site that produces metals, possibly bioplastics and ceramics, possibly glass, from primary sources right next to it, and has state-of-the-art 3D printing, CNC, and pilot-scale smelting capability, where electricity and thermal heat and potable water are available in quantities? So what we've got here is, over time, we will build this. It will start small. We'll start small and simple, and as more money comes in, we'll develop more things. So the people who invest in this will get their money back over, a 5 to 10 year time frame. And once that venture capital is paid back, then the money then can be built to expand and develop the site according to the Promethean Nexus project. Right, so anything red here is a saleable product, and anything dark blue is a strategic capability. And this is the sort of thing that we're looking at. There are 2 sites I'm interested in, one in Peru, one in Chile. I've approached government authorities in both areas. They both find the idea interesting, but there's a lot of discussion about whether it's practical or not. So now we're talking about a mandate to look at unorthodox ideas. We need an innovation hub, and we need to test some of them at scale. So what you're looking at here is the testing, the physical demonstration of a number of ideas and prototypes. We are not only going to make money out of this, we're going to demonstrate that they are real. And that brings us to Chrysopeia. So an innovation hub will be funded and founded as part of the Vulcan Catalyst project. This will be a hub with world-class capability that has a mandate to assess unorthodox ideas and then formalize them into a useful form. So we're going to take ideas across 8 frontiers, and eventually we'll take some of those ideas and we'll prototype them into technology. So there'll be IP flowing off this hub. Some of that IP will be public domain, and some of it will be sold, depending on what it is. These are the frontiers: life systems and earth systems, social science, holistic health, energy in all its forms, in particular electromagnetic and electrostatic, nuclear atomic science, materials, manufacture, and also the understanding and use of AI. Chrysopoeia will work on the following frontiers to facilitate breakthroughs to allow our industrial society to transform into a more long-term sustainable system. So each of the things that you see there on the list is there for a reason. And once we have the breakthrough, we will use that breakthrough. And that's why it's there. So this was the original mind map I put together. It's a little on the small side. Sorry about that. Each division will facilitate a breakthrough in how we do things. Each division will have its own laboratory, sample storage, office, library, and database. All divisions will be organized so they can interact with other divisions. One of the things I want to look at is energy, the true nature of energy. I think we have only partially understand what energy actually is, also what heat actually is. We have an understanding up to the point where we can predict what it will do, but we still have yet to get to the bottom of the rabbit hole. So there's a whole lot of things, and there's an interface between energy systems and life systems. So I would like to look at that at some form. This is a long way down the track. This is when the project's established, revenue is flowing, industrial systems are up and running. One of the things that there's three basic wings to the project. One is industrial evolution. The other is a new relationship with the environment. But the third is development of a new social contract. We will found a game theory laboratory. Now, this will be asked to test a number of things. We will discuss in debate a whole series of ideas for a new social system, where we use money differently. And I want that debate to get to the point, if we're going to get to the point where we can actually turn it into a practical system, then we can game theory it. And so I want it tested over a 500-year time frame to see what is required for a stable system to be in operation. And this is the job there. So here's a rough schematic of what the city could look like. So you've got the city next to it, and you've got your industrial constellation, but you've got a couple of freshwater reservoirs. The area I'm looking at is the coast of South America, which is desert. It's land that no one else really wants to do anything with, because there's no water there. So if we're actually pulling water from the sea and we're desalinating it after power generation, we're then going to capture that steam into water, freshwater systems, and then irrigate it back down the hill with drinking water for the city, water for the industrial constellation, and about half the water will be available to run an agricultural belt and support biosystems. So that's how the two basic parts fit together. Vulcan Catalyst and Promethean Nexus are different aspects of the same thing. Here are the development stages. So the development stages will go through. With foundation, we start out and plan out all the steps and stages. Step 2, chrysalis. So we start fundraising, and then during that fundraising, we will discuss with a number, and we're going to visit a few sites, and we end up selecting a city site. Third step is innovation, although in practice, innovation started already. We're going to be collecting innovative ideas through the website that I posted earlier. We're going to make a database, an ideas portal, where these ideas are accessible by everyone. We're then going to run a series of conferences where we're inviting people to come in with ideas, and then we're going to publish the results in proceedings, and then make those publicly available as well. Those ideas, and there's going to be thousands of them, and some of them are useful, some of them not, depending on the site. Each site is different and will have different requirements. The idea is to get a group of, say, 30 to 40 people together into a in-person conference. We will look at these several thousand ideas and look at how to fit them together into a series of plans of what the final city could look like. And we're to digest this down into 3 or 4 basic plans. At that in-face conference, and a series of engineering companies who do feasibility studies will be in attendance. They will be taking part, and they will be sort of shaping what's practical and what's not, and what have you. From that point, a series of feasibility studies, from scoping to pre-fees to fees, will be done, and then at some point we will then settle in what a final plan would be for the city. So we're going to go through the engineering chute as like any industrial site. Vulcan Catalyst is step 4. So we have we found the site and we've got the long range plan. So now we're going to have an industrial project that will raise revenues for the sale of cheap electricity and diesel fuel. So we're going to secure the land, set up reactor park, set up the infrastructure required to take water from the sea, desalinate it, and then supply fresh water. We will also build the starting seed of the city, which will be the village for the staff who work on this project. Step 5 is Promethean Nexus. So the Promethean Nexus project can now go into the phase where we can say, well, we've got funding now, we've got a plan, we've got a place, things are operating, and we can start the site development. So this column here of site development, it goes from landfall all the way out to completion. So landfall is, well, we turn up and say 10 to 15 people, and we're going to map the site in all its forms. That's like the equivalent of an exploration mining camp. Inception, earthworks to prepare the site, construction of industrial facilities, and construction of an industrial settlement of 300 people with basic facilities. We're also preparing parts of the land, arable land, which will later become a permaculture or regenerative agricultural belt. We then establish the capability. The settlement expands to about 800 people, but now we're actually going to build and construct the industrial assets that will become the superstructure framework of the city. And then D, we construct the first city sector, which is the transformation of an industrial settlement, which is sort of like a mine site village, into what we normally associate with a modern town, which is where a place where families live and they do things. And so that is a city sector of about 1,000 to 2,000 people, and which is the equivalent of, say, a suburb, in like a suburb in a small town. And E is completion, which is the rest of the city is constructed, and we have a ceiling of about 10,000 people. Now, 10,000 people, if you think about it, is a relatively small town. But I call it a city because the amount of complexity and activity that's happening in this little town is more than normal. We're going to collapse a global supply chain in some forms, not all, some, into a city, a small city, and that's why I call it a city. At this point too, step 5, the Chrysopoeia Foundation will start off. It'll start off with about 20 scientists, and they're going to look at innovative building construction materials and start the game theory laboratory and do a number of other things, and then it expands from there. So this is a small city. We go to step 6. Ecophilic connection. So we want a new relationship with the planetary environment, but applied locally. And the very simple way to do that is we produce all our food through permaculture and regenerative agricultural practices. So we don't talk about it, we just do it. A big band or a belt around the city is developed, and that will be eventually our food. Right, so it'll have to be sort of developed and maintained, and soil food health is the key. Step 7, this is when we're going to start and get into prototyping of technology. So run by the Chrysopoeia Institute will be the prototyping of technology through step 7 is prototyping, step 8 is validation, did it work? Some of those things will take them, and we will do a commercial trigger where we'll patent and commercialize some things to generate revenue to flow back into the city. And step 10 is the gateway, where step 10 is everything is now fully formed. The social contract that's been debated about for the first 5 to 10 years, while we're paying back our investment capital and developing the city, we've now got a relatively stable system. We can now transition from an industrial corporation and fold into a democratically stewarded new kind of society where the city council of that society owns the corporation. So all the industrial assets in this project and all the civil engineering structures will be owned by that city council, and they will then run those services to generate revenue and work out what to do with that revenue. We will use the tools of today to build the world of tomorrow. Now that's the rough plan. It will change as we go along, but that's the plan for now. Here's an artist's impression of my wife of what this could look like. The plan has changed a bit since then, but it does bring to life an idea. Right, so let's get into some of these systems. So this is water. Water systems for humans, and that have to balance with natural water systems. We're going to generate fresh water while generating electricity. Take seawater, put it through multi-stage flash desalination plant, which takes heat. So an MSR unit produces 560 degrees. A pebble bed thorium reactor produces 950 degrees, which means it's just going to be better. Most of that water will be turned into steam. Some of it will be a salt brine, which will then, we either take that salt brine and extract the salt out of it and the metals out of it, or take the salt and turn it into a geopolymer to build construction materials. Both are possible. Put it through a steam turbine, generate electricity. That electricity is then gone off to service a number of things, including we could actually host and service a couple of data centers and then charge money for doing so. That steam on the other side of the turbine, the temperature has dropped substantially, but it's still steam. And so we pump it uphill. So the area I like all along the South America coast, it's a coastline going up into the Andes. So there's a slope. Heat likes to rise, so we can pump it uphill and capture it at a higher elevation into a reservoir. Mineral balance that water, and after it's cooled and it's useful to support living things, irrigate it back down the hill in gravity fashion into the areas we want. And in the mass balance, the industrial systems we're planning represent maybe half of the steam that we would produce. So the other half will be for the agricultural belt, but also to support biosystems around the city. So this is the multi-stage flash unit. Again, this is pretty standard. It's off-the-shelf stuff. It's not quite as economical as other methods of desalination. It's used in places like Saudi Arabia where they've got plenty of energy. And so we'll be in that position as well. I like this idea because I want the water. So it's not just the energy I want for drinking, but I want to be generating energy and water at the same time. So the map looks like this. Take seawater, turn it into brine, put it through a solar still where the rest evaporates out, and so you've got either straight sea salt, which can be used as a geopolymer, or salt turns out to be the starting point for a lot of chemical reactions. So it might be useful just as it is. Or do we extract individual salts, or do we break it apart and extract the actual metals? You often hear things like there's plenty of lithium in seawater. There's plenty of lots of metals in seawater, trace elements in particular. Right, well, now's the time to extract it. And that's how we do it. So by the time you get to the end of it, there's almost nothing left. So when you take seawater and desalinate it, other plants around the world, they dump vast amounts of salt back in the sea. And that's a problem. Here, we're going to take those the salt and we're going to use it. And the mass balance, nothing is returned to the sea. Right, so it's going to look something like this. So here's a patch of land somewhere along the coast of South America. An animation, sorry about that. It seems to work. Let's drop the city there. Our industrial constellation is outside the city. We've got a thorium molten salt or a pebble bed reactor there. We're pulling water from the sea. The steam then goes up to a series of reservoirs at a higher elevation. And then water is irrigated back to the city for our drinking water and to run agriculture. There's our industrial needs. And something like a third of the water left can be used for other things. For example, making a green oasis around the city. Now remember, this is a patch of desert where it's very dry and there is not a lot of water around. And so it means we can actually generate fresh water regardless of whether there's a drought on or not, and regardless of what population needs for drinking water around. We're not in competition with anyone else for anything. Right, so now I'm going to talk about the power grid. I was talking before about the power grid in those books I was reading. Our current system is very fragile. It's very fragile, and it's not very resilient for anything. And even a small setback is enough to cause a lot of damage. So I'm proposing a 3-tiered grid, and this has been designed for resilience. The primary power grid is controlled. This is the thorium network. This is reactor park. 3 to 5 small modular reactors, molten salt reactors, whatever we can get hold of. It will power the industrial clusters, but it will also power the city. 6 megawatts, which is very little. A single wind turbine is 6.6 megawatts now. But 6 megawatts reliably supplied is what we need. 70 megawatts is around what we need for the full industrial setup. When it's fully formed, initially we will need maybe 4 or 5 megawatts. Right, supply the city, supply the industrial constellation, and what I'm asking to have here is a battery bank with a buffer of 10 minutes. And its purpose is to balance whatever's coming out of these reactors and balance what the city needs. Is it 10 minutes? If it's 60 seconds, whatever it is, it's going to be an interface. This will solve right there and then all the problems with the variable voltage problem. We also have a control hub and a diesel generation for black starts if for whatever reason that happens. So control hub 1 exists is actually in the actual industrial cluster. The secondary power grid is the city itself. This is where all the people live. It's designed to be, the secondary power grid is to be run on non-fossil fuel systems that are a fundamentally different technology to the thorium systems. Don't put your eggs all in one basket. So we have solar and wind. It's to be about 6 megawatts in capacity. So there's a battery bank. Now we've got the buffer of 1 hour, and we've got a second control hub, and the control hub is in the city itself. So 2 control hubs, they talk to each other, and they're interchangeable. They can do each other's tasks if they need to. They've got their own satellite link, and they've got their own data storage. The purpose of the secondary power grid is to ensure human systems are okay. Communications, emergency services, the transport grid, the spine rail arterial system. More later on what that is. Access to drinking water, sewage water systems run, grey water systems run, waste and handling, all of that. The city runs. And if we do have a blackout, we've got warning. Now, normally, if everything is run off the thorium systems, where's this power coming from? So the idea is when everything's running normally, the wind and solar arrays are doing an industrial activity that's non-vital. Something like, say we're producing hydrogen, or we're producing some product that is designed to be shut down without notice and the power be tasked elsewhere. If we have a thing where the secondary grid is turned on, it means the industrial grid has crashed. Oh well, that means revenue will be lost, but the secondary power grid's job is to ensure the city runs. The tertiary power grid is resilience. Resilience back up on domestic housing. So now we've got solar panels sitting on some domestic houses and some buildings in the city. It's managed from Control Hub 2. Now, what the key here is whether each house or each building connects to the power grid is up to the occupant of that house. There's a great deal of trust that has been damaged in society at the moment, where a power grid's managed remotely, and they'll do things like turn off your air conditioning or turn off your power consumption remotely, whether you like it or not. The tertiary power grid is so everyone can be close to being self-sufficient within reason, and they choose to supply power to the grid or not. So this requires the community to actually engage. This is to actually sort of provide resilience, and that the amount of power that's actually sort of running off the tertiary grid is the final backup if everything goes sideways. This is based on the Maslow hierarchy of needs. And what would a household need? If our cooking gas is syngas, then food storage, refrigeration is probably the big ticket item for, and if we're in an area that doesn't need heating. So we need communications, access to drinking water, functional sewerage, food storage, heating, but it's not needed in this location, and cooking, well, we're going to use syngas for that. Each system, if we can do it, will have a battery storage made from non-lithium ion chemistries. Something like sodium or fluoride or something like that, whatever they are. And the control panel in each building will actually be at the control of the occupant of that building. This is to actually hand some power back to the people on the ground where they've got their own livelihood in their hands once more. Now, transport. When we need to reinvent transport. When we're phasing out fossil fuels, the largest task we're often looking at is replacing internal combustion engine technology. So when I did this peer-reviewed study, when you actually look at on the other side of the equation, the whole system is now renewable, non-fossil fuel. All fossil fuel systems are gone. And we're looking at the transport system. So the electrical power in the transport system. 2% of the fleet are trucks. You know, your really big trucks and buses. But they're consuming 42.8% of the electrical power consumption for transport. Whereas the electric vehicles that are, say, 98% of the transport fleet are consuming about a quarter of the power. So there's a disproportion of what trucks are consuming. So when we look at what do trucks do for us, what's really happening here? How do we do can we do this a different way? Because our existing society of cars and trucks are based on the old idea of horse and cart. So then I started looking at this, where, well, this was a study that did a comparison. If you had 90 people in a bus versus if they were all on bicycles versus if they had those 90 people were in 50 passenger cars, how much footprint would they take up? And then what I'm proposing is this. We will have what's called a spine rail arterial system. So you have a framework, and on top of the framework, we have monorails to move people around. On the bottom of the framework, we have a underslung cargo system that can move pods like shipping containers. This is to replace some of the road traffic, not all of it. We still need trucks and buses and cars for flexibility. But for what I realized is the transport for trucks that would be non-linear. There'll be a lot of trucks going down the same route between, say, especially the heavy trucks, going between, say, a shipping port and a distribution center. And they'll be just running back and forth, back and forth. If we had one of these systems on that way, we could actually cut out a lot of traffic. What it would mean is the transport sector would have large chunks of that sector would now be directly powered by the thorium reactors. We don't have to have standalone systems with tanks of hydrogen. So monorails, we know how to build monorails. We know how to metros. They're all over the world at the moment. So if we had one of those, but the innovation is this. This is a group in Nigeria called Futran, and they had the idea of transporting skips of ore from a mine site out along an 80-kilometer track out to a shipping port. And this was really, really cheap. When you build a railway line, for example, you've got to have a lot of civil engineering, making sure the tracks are level, and it's really expensive. This, in comparison, is just a series of metal struts that can go over any terrain. And so it's much, much cheaper to put on the ground. The metrics are as follows. On the left, we've got distance per capita, electric consumption per capita, if electric vehicles versus a hydrogen fuel cell bus, as in per passenger, versus if we were to put them all into a monorail of average size, and the electricity consumption there, and there's quite a drop in energy consumption. On the right is the hydrogen fuel cell truck versus an underslug cargo pod system in kilowatt hours per kilometer for cargo. So we're moving people and we're moving cargo, and it's the cargo is the important, especially if we go between different industrial hubs where we want to move industrial goods around between nodes. So in this report, we've got the green transition. If we were to do it normally with the electric power grid, we've got a 32% decrease in total power demand by doing it this way. The amount of power saved is 32%. And this was the point of doing it. So almost 1/3 of our power could be dropped if we did this. So then if we had the spine rail system, but then we put it out across, we redesign our city where all our places that we want to go are now on that line. And we had a bit of fun with AI. Not quite, but it gives the idea. You've got two systems that are completely independent. So the shipping containers can move with impunity in any direction, and the monorails can move in any direction. So along the same route, heavy transport does not interact with people at all. What's also interesting is I was studying things like electric vehicles and hydrogen fuel cells. Toyota, who contacted me in 2021, and we had a discussion. They've developed a few more things, and one of the things they've developed is the water engine. I'm very interested in this because it resembles, I don't know if it's the same thing or not, but an inventor called Stanley Meyer a couple of decades ago invented a water cell car where we take water and we split it into hydrogen and oxygen, and then you use it. And it was revolutionary at the time, but then it all sort of disappeared. Toyota has now come out and said they're going to do the same thing in production. If this works, if they do this, then that's our transport. That solves a lot of problems. Of course, it will need desalinated water. It'll need very, very clean water for that to work. For the same reason a hydrogen fuel cell needs clean water. But as it so happens, we're desalinating lots of water. Okay, we're coming to the end now. So this is industrial permaculture. So we're going to put all this stuff together. We're using a series of metrics like XG, which is an energy term, to define what is valuable and what is not. So this is a set of synergistic design principles derived using whole systems thinking applied to industrial design, with the flow of raw material inputs, outputs, and side streams are all balanced as one coherent system. Sort of like on an organic farm, a self-sufficient organic farm. Nothing is wasted and everything flows into everything else. The manure generated by the cows and the horses and the livestock are collected, turned into compost. The compost is then made into fertilizer. The fertilizer fertilizes the organic vegetables. The unused green biomass after you harvest the vegetables is then fed to the cows, etc. So this is the constellation of industrial scale sites. We've already talked about this. The waste products of each process plant could be valorized and used as input feedstock for another process plant. Network together like an organic self-sufficient farm. A small number of strategically useful products. We're not going to do this for everything. That's impossible. But could we do it for a small number of things that will empower everything else? So the principles of the circular economy, supported by abundant, cheap energy and industrial heat in a localized, self-sufficient grid, is the target I'm aiming for. So a couple of examples. So recycling rubber tires into diesel fuel. What I haven't talked about yet is mine sites. Now, the mine site that we're hoping to actually sort of do business with and sell them electrical power, every mine site in the world has a pile of spent truck tires. So these tires are huge. They're the size of, they're 4 or 5 meters in diameter. And when they wear out, they just put them in a pile and they get landfilled later. It's like every mine site has a pile of tires they don't know what to do with. So if we develop a mobile shredding plant that can go out to mine sites, so the problem is handling them. You've got to handle them and move them around. They're so ungainly. But if we're set up for it, it'll work. So if we can take the tires, debead them, cut them into manageable bits and shred them, put the shredded material into a shipping container, and then truck the shipping container fueled by diesel fuel that we will later make, and truck it back to our site, put it into a pyrolysis plant. About 30% is solid char, which is your carbon black, which later can become graphene and carbon fiber. About 10 to 20% is syngas, and then you've got steel scrap and a fuel oil. That fuel oil, and this is using heat from the thorium molten salt unit, which is very cheap heat. Put it into a fractional distillation plant, and you end up with diesel fuel. And so we run back and forth and back and forth. Because we have cheap diesel fuel for transport and cheap electricity heat, this becomes quite viable. And so it looks something like this. So here's your map. You've got pyrolysis coming from your thorium systems. You've got pelletized rubber, which can be turned into rubber products. Steel scrap, which, well, that's not that valuable, but we'll see. But if we take some of the, so there's your fuel, diesel fuel substitute, which is saleable. Take your carbon black, spherodize it. You can make carbon fiber and graphene. And if you put that with a 3D printer capability, we can make graphene product manufacture. Syngas, take human sewage, put it in the pyrolysis system, turn it into cooking gas for the city. Now, this is an interesting one. Microwaving rocks. So the European Space Agency wanted a source of water and oxygen on the moon. And so what they've developed is bombarding rocks with microwaves for an extended period of time. We're talking of the order of 40 minutes. The rock atomic structure breaks down, and the oxygen in the lattice breaks apart, and pure oxygen comes off the system. So what we're harnessing here is when you put, say, aluminium foil in the microwave, it sparks. That's what we're harnessing. And it turns out sulfur in particular, has a way of accelerating this. So you end up with globules of metal, because if the rock is 40% oxygen and we take the oxygen away, it breaks down and forms metal globules. So this system being developed in the photo there uses about as much electricity as a hairdryer, and they plan to run it off a solar panel on the moon, which is interesting, which means if we've got plenty of electricity on the ground, well, we can then start making metals. So if we take basalt, a rock, any rock, it's about 30-40% oxygen, depending on the mineralogy. And what seems to be happening is these globules of metal are forming, and they are pure the titanium, pure silicon, pure aluminium. Now, the Space Agency, European Space Agency, is interested in the oxygen. I'm interested in the metal. Of course, the oxygen, well, we can use to either roll back some of the dead zones in the ocean, or we can sell it to the space industry as a fuel. Imagine, if you will, the following. Go out to a place, an industrial site that has a lot of waste problems, like a smelter. There's a smelter in the north of South America that's one of the most polluted places on Earth. Get paid to take their industrial waste away. That will use to offset the running costs. Put that material into a microwave system. Break it down. Then put it through a series of basic mineral processing steps. It could be gravity, for example, pilot scale leaching. Put it through what we call membrane separation to separate the different isotopes out into different groups. Put that into a plasma furnace to produce very fine powder, and that could be feed for a 3D printer. So 3D print of manufactured components, which means we have saleable products with a very flexible design flow. In one shed, we've got waste going in one end and saleable high-tech products coming out the other. Well, it'll be interesting to see if we can get that working. Around the site, we're talking about making a series of stockpiles. We'll have a sorting waste transfer plant, sort them in, and then use things. We'll look something like that. If we've got access to a smelter, we've got things like bottom ash and fly ash, smelter slag, shredded rubber. It's all useful. This is circular economy stuff. Right. So back to Jacques Fresco and the Venus Project. Jacques came up with the idea of if you had multiple industrial systems that operated, but the products from each one were useful, and they all came together in a central hub, the final products, and they were connected by a rail system. So I took that idea and I started to actually design the industrial constellation. I I like the idea of taking waste and stripping useful parts out of them, and then feeding those useful parts into a machine shop to make new things. So the boneyard comes back. Sorting of waste. This is where I used to do my professional career years ago. And then feed it all into manufacture, but using sort of high-tech, 3D adaptive manufacturing, a machine shop, component manufacture. The resource balanced economy. It's we're going to manage our resources. So we're going to track and manage the resources. What do we mean by that? This is a photograph of a control hub at a mine site, where all processes are flowing into one room and it's optimized from one place. And all operators can talk to each other because they're right there. I'm going to use that basic model here. So what we're looking at here is we're looking at the flow of materials. The current world, with the fourth industrial revolution, wants the surveillance of the individual in their own home. I do not agree with that. We can do this without the surveillance of the individual at all. So what we're talking about here is the local supermarket. What's the stock take? What materials are being bought and consumed by people? What waste? It's collected, it's sorted, it's turned into stuff. And then the other side of it, in terms of manufactured, when we manufacture stuff and send it back, well, how do we move it around? And so we're actually tracking and tracing resources as they flow through industrial assets without tracking people. And the key to this is the spine rail arterial system to move stuff around. Right, so we want it to be working in harmony with the environment. So we need to have a new perception of what the environment is to us at a social contract scale. And so the food production is the key here. So if food production merges with natural biosystems, if they're all part of the same system, but we're phasing out petrochemical fertilizers, herbicides, and pesticides, no glyphosate, wipe it out. And by doing that, our relationship with the environment will change. This whole presentation could be geared from this point, but this is an energy presentation. So what we want to do is take land that is actually quite barren at the moment with no water and soil that's quite arid, develop biosystems, and then in some of the areas start developing food. So we will source our own fresh water as much as we need as food production. So regardless of drought or climate or demands on local water resources, we can do this. To finish up, we want to build a gateway in a world worth living in and leaving to our grandchildren. We face a challenging future. We have a choice to complain about the situation or work towards a solution. So again, this is the website. If people are interested in, I encourage them to go and have a look, sign up to the newsletter, and we can stay in touch. All right, done.
Wow.
Stop sharing. Hello, Arnes.
Changing the roles. Simon, that was a masterclass in tearing up the energy rulebook. And we have folks flooding the chat. Let's go now for live questions. Okay.
Probably the first one.
Evan Locke asked a lot of questions. One of them is, was there a specific turning point in your collaboration with the Venus project on Promethean Nexus that ultimately led to the website being shut down? What happened at that moment?
So, I was collaborating with the Venus project. I'm still one of their advisors. I very much support what the Venus project is doing. However, what I found is when in this space, there's about 10 or 12 groups trying to do this sort of work. My work is the only one that is looking at an energy and industrial transformation. Everyone else is either looking at a new social contract or a permaculture society being developed. All other groups are making the assumption that energy systems are just fine and we don't need to do anything. I'm trying to do something so fundamentally different. And because I'm trying to do that, I've got to raise a vast amount of capital to actually sort of get things going. Like Vulcan Catalyst to get going, once we have the land and the regulation sandbox, on top of that, we need about $15-20 million, right? Where the actions for the other groups are things like we're just going to build a civilian settlement and we're going to have look at social contract stuff. Our priorities were so very, very different. So what I found after a while is we were getting bogged down, and I kept going in one direction, they kept going in another. And so what we ended up agreeing to do is just, well, all right, we're going to stop that collaboration and I'm going to go off and do my thing. When I'm in a position to do so, right, they come back together, right? And they come back together. And that's what's happened.
Okay. Next one. Could you tell us what your book, The New Electricity, is about, how it connects to your work with unconventional and speculative energy ideas, and when we might get a chance to read it?
Right. This is a thing I started years ago, and I just need to get it and finish it. Right. So what this was, I did a piece of work where I did a tour of duty through all energy systems, and I published this in a big report in 2021. What I found was a whole lot of unorthodox systems that were outside the existing standard way of doing things. I was asked at the time not to include those things because it was a bridge too far, and I was asked to include only energy systems that were in operation now, that were commercially available now. And so, but what I found was about 40 or 50 different systems. Like Nikola Tesla, what was he doing? And once you understand what he was doing, if it worked, how would society use it? And the final question is, should we do it? And the answer is probably not. Because he had the ability of transmitting electricity through the air at industrial levels from one side of the planet and back again with very, very good efficiency. So the implications was he had a big hydro system at Niagara Falls, and he was generating so much electricity there. He said, look, we don't need to, if I can transmit with an aerial to everyone electricity, then once we're running this, anyone with an aerial can access it. And the reason they call it free energy is they wouldn't have to actually pay money for it. But the problem is we are now starting to learn the problems with electronic smog, things like 5G and all that. There are health problems there. So having industrial scale electricity in the air, probably not a good idea. Anyway, so I went through a tour of duty through all these things and looked at all these different things and what are they? And what I found is all of these ideas revolve around 3 or 4 concepts. The idea that everything is frequency and vibration is one. The other one is rotating magnetic fields is another. What also seems to be happening is what we call electricity, electrostatics, magnetics, and gravity are all interacting in ways that we don't understand. So we still have yet to get down the rabbit hole of like we can use Maxwell's equations quite well, right? But it turns out about halfway through that derivation to those equations, they could be turned into something else. Okay, is that the case? Let's have a look at that. So what I was just saying is I got to a certain point where I had a shotgun blast of all these ideas into a draft form, but now what I've realized is what we call energy is not actually understood very well. And I want to go and interview a series of people about the nature of what energy is, what actually energy is in all its form, including heat. And when I've got that, then the conclusion of the book, the contribution of the book is a step forward in what we think of energy from a theoretical point of view. And when I can get off my ass and get that done, I'll publish it.
It will happen eventually. So, next one from Alonso Amigo. How do you take it into account the demographic evaluation of humanity?
Demographic as in, so we are going to have several steps around the development of the social contract, which will be in that. There's 3 basic wings of Prometheus. And one of them is we're going to look at like how might we live. So the idea is to collect a whole series of ideas, have a series of debates online, but also have a debating school on site where people are coming in and we're really working these ideas over and working like how could we live? And then to the point where it's an actionable plan, we've got a game theory. So the game theory lab, the ideas of Daniel Schmachtenberger, for example, would fit into this window. In fact, Daniel, if you're listening to this, I've got a little job for you, mate. Yeah. Well, the answer to that is no. This is not my expertise. So someone else will be doing it. In a series of debates and game theory developments, we will settle into what that new plan might be in a practical context, so it's stable long term.
All right. So for such ambitious goals, are you planning to rely on public and private funding? How do you manage the risk of failure and the perception of being a scam?
Funny. Right. So the foundation will be a Vulcan Catalyst, where we go off and we're going to set up a industrial park where its job as a corporation, and we're going to raise revenue to the sale of cheap electricity and the cheap diesel fuel. So this is contingent on us setting up a thorium molten salt reactor. And one of the questions was, well, that's not allowed in South America. This is the idea of a regulation sandbox. A regulation sandbox is an agreement with the local government. So in this small bit of area, we're going to have a suspension of the normal regulations, and we're going to have new ones in a research context. This is there's precedent for this, and it's possible if we have the support and backing of a corporation, thus the cooperation of the local regional government. So all the power brokers of the region agree to do it. Okay, then we're away. Then we're going to generate revenue. So we're going to run in two parallel tracks. This is why we have Promethean Nexus on one side and Vulcan Catalyst on another. So Vulcan Catalyst has the foundation, and so it makes revenue. Promethean Nexus is going to be a grassroots campaign that's going to be talking about what the plan might be and the exchange of ideas. Yes, we'll be asking for donations. Now, what this does is once Vulcan Catalyst is actually up and running, it will secure the land, it will secure the major industrial assets, it'll secure water, fresh water supply, and it will build the starting seat of the city in the form of a workers' village. But that's as far as it can go according to that business model, because investment has to be paid back to the investors, and then capital has to flow back. So Promethean Nexus will raise capital to fund all the interesting stuff, the more abstract stuff that the investors won't want to have anything to do with. For example, if you go before a capital investment group and you say, I'm going to make a new social contract, they'll get shot on stage. It says, get out. So how do we do that? And so we need a way of getting them to engage where they feel safe to do so, right? But the project still proceeds. And so it's going to be a leapfrog idea. It all comes down to, can we get thorium up and running? The simple answer is, if we can't do it in the West, I'm just going to learn Chinese and move to China, and I'll do it there, and I'll come back and do business with whoever's left.
Yeah, good idea. But Promethean Nexus envisions a closed-loop city. How do you sell this utopia to corporations obsessed with quarterly profits?
So, what we would do is we sell the idea of Vulcan Catalyst. Vulcan Catalyst. So Vulcan Catalyst is we're going to use cheap electricity to apply circular economy things to make products which will make us rich, right? As in we'll generate revenue. People can invest in that. What we do with our money that we come from, that's our problem. That's our affair. That's not your thing. And so then when we get to Promethean Nexus, and we say, well, what is this Promethean Nexus? Oh, this is a grassroots funding, and we've got funding that doesn't necessarily involve you, but we're going to do this stuff anyway.
But if SMR fail, is Vulcan Catalyst sunk? What's your plan B?
Well, plan B would be geothermal, which one of the sites I'm looking at has good geothermal. But if the small modular reactors fail for whatever reason, then we've got a problem. So that's a risk. But what I would say is we now have about many years of operation in China. Like I said, do I just move to China and give it to them? I'm actually finding the West chooses to fail. And so instead of trying to sort of be all things to all people, so this is the prototype I'm going to try and do. You can come with me if you like, and if you don't like it, stay where you are.
But you mentioned geothermal, and in my eyes, geothermal is a big one. Mm-hmm. What's actually happening there? How close are we there?
So geothermal, the reserves geothermal reserves are actually world class in the area I'm looking at, but you've also got earthquakes. The reason I liked SMRs is they're small enough to be put up on isolation vibration platforms, which means earthquakes are not a problem. So all industrial systems can be done that way. So the geothermal reserves in an area that's relatively close, you could actually sort of you don't have to drill many kilometers into the earth. Where we are with geothermal in general comes down to the technology in the tight oil sector being applied for fast drilling deeply. They've really got some advances there. I was part of a research project in Belgium that used what's called electrodynamic fragmentation. And one of the groups that we're looking at using that to drill deep holes, for the gas industry. And what it is the drill bit never touches the rock, because in the it uses electricity to fragment and the drill bit never touches the rock, which means it doesn't have to rotate, and it doesn't jam and catch like normal drill. So it can go fast, but it consumes a lot of electricity, a vast amount of electricity. So question one, can we drill a hole fast, that deep? But once you do, you've then got to line it, which is a problem. But once you've lining it, you've got lots of faults and joints, and your steam pressure gets lost and all that. Then you've got to get the heat at that level up to the surface fast enough to be useful. And by the time you do that, you often lose so much heat that you can't really generate electricity anymore. So there are challenges. So there are people who tell me that they are well on top of this and they're just waiting for the next breakthrough, but they sound to me like the fusion people. Because a lot of the problems they are quite large. They think they're going to get it right eventually, but to me there are a lot of bottlenecks. Some are technological, but some are natural world. And so I don't know.
Let's go to the next one. Specifically, how would you address the risk with projects like building 3 to 5 thorium SMRs in Peru, given there's no nuclear regulation or infrastructure there?
This will have to be a corporation. We need the protection of a mining corporation in conjunction with the local government. If we can do that, it's a three-way partnership between Vulcan Catalyst, a large corporation that requires electrical power, and the local government. Now that local government is in trouble. There's two countries, one's Peru, one's Chile. Now, the site in Chile is actually more useful because they've got more industrial waste, which is useful, but we have more products. Waste is translated into saleable products. So the site in Peru, though, is very interesting because the government has recently sold all its electrical generation capacity to the Chinese government, or rather to Chinese companies that are owned and controlled by the Chinese government,
which are almost all.
And so that's why the Chinese have put like a massive port there. They are now seeing Peru as a little fiefdom, like a vassal colony almost. So the Peruvians are most displeased about this. So if I was to turn up with them and say, right, guys, we could put on a relatively small patch of land, without you spending a cent, a demonstration system that if it worked, you could put in many systems right across the whole region that actually is able to supply heat, heat, electricity, a system to deal with sewage sanitation, and a possible source of fresh water, and a system that they control directly. So in their own best interests, they're going to put aside their normal the normal difficulties of getting this going, and so, all right, let's do it. That's the hope. So it's a risk, but, oh well.
Yeah. It might pay off. You've been associated with the masterminding Eden, which appears to focus on esoteric and spiritual ideas. How does that align with your scientific work and the projects you've been involved in?
No conflict. Masterminding Eden's a very good group. What they've done is they've gotten hold of everyone all over the world that's in this space. That is, if we were to do things differently, what would that be? Right, so they've got everyone there. Now, they've actually also gone into a lot of, this is back to this before, a lot of discussion about the social contract. And that social contract does tend to lend to, well, we've been raping and pillaging the planet now for some time. We should not do that anymore, right? Right, and so that, and yes, when it's sort of the way they discuss things, it often does go in the direction of the spiritual. I got no problem with that. Like, what someone believes is their own issue. Doesn't affect the industry and the science.
Yeah. So the last one, goes with the UFO.
Cool.
Simon Peru is known as a UFO hotspot, and Masterminding Aiden explores UFO themes. I'm curious, is there any connection to your interest in vortex propulsion and the choice of Peru for your project?
Yes! Okay, my three... well, we'll see. My 3 professional goals are as follows. 1, a nuclear reactor for personal use. 2, my office under a volcano. 3, an antique flying saucer, again for personal use.
It's important to stay ambitious.
So I've got no problem with the idea that UFOs are real. I'm actually not working on that directly. That's just that's an entertainment thing on the side. I've originally approached Peru because I liked the idea, because everywhere else in the world that actually has good land is already taken up, and you literally have to fight the people on the ground for resources when you get there. This whole thing has been set up to go to an area where there is nothing. It's land that there's people just don't know what to do with, and change the rules. Right. So if we make landfall in an area where it's desert by the sea, no one's there, no one cares, no one's interested. We're not in competition with everyone. We don't have to fight anyone for this stuff.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So that's why Peru.
Yeah. Simon, thank you.
You're welcome.
Great presentation. You've just given us a glimpse into a future most wouldn't dare imagine. One where energy isn't just sustainable but unstoppable. Vulcan Catalyst isn't just a project, it's a revolution in industrial logic, a proof that we can break free from the fossil fuel trap without falling into the same old pitfalls. To everyone watching, this is your call to action. The energy transition won't be handed to us. It will be built by those who are bold enough to challenge the status quo. If today's discussion lit a fire in you, follow Simon's work. Dive into the Promethean Nexus vision and ask yourself, where do I fit in this energy landscape? Until the next time, stay curious, stay relentless, and most of all, stay unchained. I'm Ades Biogradlia for Energy News Biz, signing off, but the conversation is just getting started. See you soon.